a while, but something about Brea. Whenever Beth and I come down to this area, we come down to go to Disneyland and all those kinds of things. Sometimes we'll come down for a bar or into Brea. There's something about it for us that's just, it's like home. And it always is. I was born in Oregon, but this is home, and we just have so much love and appreciation in our hearts. I'd love to spend, all morning just letting everyone know about what's going on in our lives. So I'll give you the brief synopsis. Andrew's 21, he's engaged, and Sarah's 19, and she's in Florida. She was here probably a month or so ago with Adam and Megan Kitt. And Jordan's a senior in high school. Now, if you remember all the way back when we first moved here, back in 2002, Andrew was 4, Sarah was 2, and Jordan was just 6 months. So a lot of things have changed over the years, and it's a constant reminder when I look at my kids and the pictures of my kids when we were here of how much older I'm getting, and people have already talked about my hearing aids and things like that, and so I appreciate that love of brethren, that great reminder. Well, what we're going to be doing over the next few days is just talking about what I think is considerably one of the most important topics. And so our focus is not going to be on bouncing around to different passages as our subject, but really remain in one passage. And so from Sunday all the way through Wednesday, we're going to be in the book of Romans, chapter 12. And I invite you to have your Bible to turn over there to Romans chapter 12. And as Brent mentioned, we're talking about this subject of practical Christianity. How's this go for? There we go. Okay. So, let's start off with this question. Did it work? There we go. Let's start off with this question. And this is a pretty simple question. At least it is in our thinking. That is, if you were to define a Christian, what is a Christian? The Bible only uses that term 3 times, Christian. First called Christian Antioch, and we understand what the typical definition is, as belonging to Christ or of Christ or a follower of Christ and his teaching. But let's look at it from the perspective of the world. When the world defines a Christian, how do they define them? They define them oftentimes in a very negative way, don't they? That Christians have a superior attitude, that Christians have their whole life together, that Christians are perfect. And so sometimes people have this standoff mentality from Christians because, my life is not so good, and so, there's no connection that is there. If we were asking about what the religious world, how do they define Christianity? You'll have quite a bit of a different definition. Christians in the religion define Christianity in terms of what I get out of it. And it becomes very self-centered or self-motivated. And so you have instrumentation in churches because of how it makes you feel. Or they might have programs to address social needs, programs about finances or programs about addictions and things like that. So they look at Christianity and they define it in a very self-centric. But what is a Christian? I came across a quote, you probably have heard it because it's a quote that a lot of people have quoted, and it's simply this: sitting in a church doesn't make you a Christian any more than sitting in your garage makes you a car. And there's some truth to that. But the religious world, and their definition of Christian is, I go on Sunday, I perform a service, I check a few boxes, I feel good when I leave, therefore that's what I am. I am a Christian. But Christianity, biblically speaking, is much different than that. Christianity is, if we were to define it through this series, is the defining quality of our entire life. Christianity is not just a segment of our life. The religious world will view it is, I'm a Christian, I go to church on Sunday, but then on Monday I do this, and Tuesday I do this. And so what they start doing is they start saying, okay, this is me over here with my friends, and this is me over here in work, and this is me in my home life, and then over here I'll carve out this little section, and I'll say this is my religious, spiritual, Christian life. But that's not at all how the New Testament defines Christianity. Christianity is an aspect of our life. Christianity defines our life completely, doesn't it? It is who we are. And in that, what it does is it draws parameters around every aspect of our life. See, if I have my life as it ought to be in Christ, what that does is that will affect my relationship. And it affects my relationship to my employer or my employees. It affects my relationship to my friends. It affects relationships to my hobbies. All those kinds of things are defined by, or we should say redefined by Christ. So what that really does call us to is this concept that Christianity is a matter of how we think, what we say, and what we do. Now, when we come to Romans chapter 12, the reason this is such an important passage, and there are, I would say, definitive chapters in the Bible. There are chapters in the Bible that we know well because they state something that is of great significance. We go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve, sin enters into the world, God puts His plan to redeem man in motion, and you have the first prophecy of the Messiah in verse 15. Or we can look at Genesis chapter 12 and the promise of Abraham, and then through him would be a land would be given, and through him would come one that would bless all nations. And then the Apostle Paul picks up on that theme in the book of Galatians. Those are these kinds of chapters that stick out in our mind. They're definitive. I would put in that category Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12 is a synopsis in a lot of ways of the entire book of Romans. And if you break down the book of Romans, it's something like this. And we know this. This isn't anything new. That in chapters 1 through 11 of Romans, what we have is the foundation of our life. Now, as the Apostle Paul writes Romans, he has a certain point in writing. There's several points in that exposition of that epistle. But one of his points is to correct the Jewish fallacy that rightness before God was based on their works of merit under the old law. And the second thing was that their rightness before God was based on their relationship to Abraham. And so it's based on on the right works, and it's on relationship. So the Apostle Paul comes in, and you know this, where he says in chapter 1, he lays out that people are under judgment of God because God expressed His presence through creation and they've rejected it. And so he goes and he talks about the sins of the Gentiles in chapter 1. In chapter 2, he talks about the sins of the Jews who thought, hey, we are better than them because we have practiced the law. And this goes through where the rest of the book through chapter 11, where Paul is laying this case down that you are Christians not because of how good you are, but because of the grace of God. That's what has brought you to this point. And then we come to chapter 12, and then we have this breakdown. This is, if you notice in verse 1 of chapter 12, The very first word is therefore. So you have your foundation of life. It's by grace in God that you're able to be in this position. Now, therefore, or I appeal to you, therefore, in verse 1, brothers, that you ought to conduct yourself a certain way. And so when there's the foundation of life, grace of God, that we are able to receive through obedience, that we are to be committed to that. And so in verse 1, I appeal to you, brothers, that you present a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And what he addresses here is that as the Jews understood sacrifice, the physical sacrifice of animals, now he's drawing them to understand your life as a sacrifice. And as you sacrifice your life, that is the last word in verse 1, your spiritual worship or your spiritual service. He says that is your worship, that you live a certain way. Now, verse 1 and verse 2, they are expounded upon in verse 3 all the way through the end of the book of Romans. Because you are a living sacrifice, this is how you act. And so then in verse 3 through verse 8, there are certain supplements for this life. There are certain gifts, abilities, talents that we have to help ourselves through this life and to help those that are around us through this life, to praise and to glorify God by that we offer. But then we come down to verse 9. And in verse 9, you have principles for this sacrificial, worshipful life. And it's here that we will slow down. And what I want to do is, in each lesson, take one theme out of this section. We look at it and we say, okay, these are just very quick, short, pithy type of statements, and it's easy when you have that kind of writing, we just skim right over it and we pass over. And yet, as we go through, I want to impress what the Apostle Paul is saying defines us as Christians. And if it's not present, then it is something that needs to be present in our lives. It's something to work on. Now, the very first thing he says in verse 9 is this: let love be genuine. And so what do we call this morning's lesson? The practical Christian is one who has a sincere love. And I hope you notice that in that word practical, there's a very small word that comes in the middle of it. And it will be highlighted in every lesson. That is, Christianity is about actual behavior. It's about how we act. It's about how we live to honor God. Now, the first one he says, let love be genuine, abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good, love one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another. And so when we talk about the Christian, how he is to behave, how he is to live, the very first place he starts with is this biblical theme. And it's just one word, 4 letters, and it's love. Really, isn't love on every page of the Bible? The Bible is dripping with love. I mean, one of the most popular verses that expresses the entire theme of the Bible, John 3, God so what? Loved. Because God loved, this is what he did for you. Now, because of what he did for you, you go out and you love. And so we want to talk for a few moments about the priority of love in our lives. Throughout the Bible, we see this theme. Some of the great passages that we remember. Matthew chapter 22, verse 37 through 39. Jesus is approached and says, what's the greatest commandment? You remember what his answer was? What's the very first? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is likened to it. Love your neighbor as yourself. On these hang what? All the law and the prophets. Everything has always gone back to this concept of love. God loves you, therefore you love. You see it expressed in the Ten Commandments. The very first part of the Ten Commandments is, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make a graven image. You shall remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. There's these concepts of God, love God. And then the second half of the commandments is about loving others. Honor your father and mother, murder, do not commit adultery, and so on. And so this theme is consistent. We go to 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 13. And we know that chapter. That chapter is a chapter on love. And yes, that it's something that we understand, but it's important to understand in the context of 1 Corinthians in chapter 12. He's talking about spiritual gifts. And the brethren are arguing and fighting over who has the best spiritual gift, and speaking in tongues because it is sensational, because it's exciting, it was out there, and people were drawn to it. And Paul says in chapter 13, that's great, but, and you know this in the very first few verses, if I don't have love, I can speak in the tongues of angels, I can do all these things. If I don't have love, what am I? I'm just making noise. All I am is a clanging cymbal, a noisy gong. I'm just making noise. That's all I am. It's about love. Then he gives us this definitive picture of love in verse 4 through verse 7, which is about actions. Love does this, love does that, love does not do this. And we come down to verse 13, and he summarizes. He says, now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is what? It's love. Why is love the greatest of these? I mean, faith is pretty great, isn't it? Hope is pretty great. We'll talk about hope more tonight when we talk about overcoming life's obstacles. Hope is what sees us through. The Hebrew writer says it's the anchor of our soul. It tethers us to heaven. And yet Paul in 13 says, yeah, those are. What remains, what surpasses them is love. And this is why I think that is. Because when we have faith, we live by faith. The just shall walk by faith, not by sight. But when Christ comes in the clouds, what happens to that faith? There's going to be a day where you will no longer have faith. It becomes knowledge. It becomes actual. It becomes real. It's now substantial. What happens to hope? We hope for eternity, but when Christ comes again, are we going to have hope? No, it's realized. The only thing that's in heaven is love. The love that God has for us, that we have for God, and the love that we have for those that are our brethren. That's what's going to remain. It surpasses. That's why it is so great. John chapter 13, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. See, Jesus takes the concept of love and he elevates it and he says, you love as I loved you. That's how important it is. And so we look at love and the priority of love, and is truly something that the Bible emphasizes, but it is also the essence of what it means to be a Christian. Now look at this verse again. He says, let love be genuine. Let love be genuine. The biblical essence of love in our lives is unhypocritical. It is to be unhypocritical. Now, love does this. Now note these, and I'll put these on the screen. Number one is love is the manifestation of love. Genuine love does not manifest itself in emotionalism. Genuine love isn't, oh, I feel good, and oh, I feel this for you, and I feel that for you. That's not genuine love. Remember, we're talking about practical things. Genuine love will always manifest itself in deeds of kindness and in deeds of caring. It will always manifest itself in action. Therefore, love is sacrificial, and it is willing to serve. It is to show care for, concern for, interest in, respect for. But think about that. Have you ever known someone that they show interest in your life, they show some care in your life, some concern in your life, and the whole time that they do that, you're thinking to yourself, they really don't care. And it's kind of like this becomes a duty, or I'm a box that they have to check. And so they're there, but they're not there. People will show all kinds of favoritism if they want to gain position. People will show all kinds of favoritism if they want attention. We call them politicians, don't we? People will show all kinds of attention to show kinds of duty. But notice what the Apostle John says in 1 John chapter 3. Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in what? Deed and truth. You know, it's, you know, you can tell me you love me all day long, but it's not until you show me that it really impresses. James addresses this in James chapter 2 in his discussion of faith and works. He says, if one comes to you and they're poorly clothed or they're lacking in daily food, and you say to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled. I mean, James, maybe he's going to an extreme in what he's saying, but I think this is where a lot of people find themselves falling into. And that is, yeah, I have love. My brothers say, hey, you know, I have a real big problem. I have a need. And it's like, okay, great. And then we turn around and we walk away. That's not love. Love is active. See, genuine love is manifested. It's doing something. But genuine love is also motivated by a sense of sameness. And let me explain what I mean by that. Why do we love? Well, we love God because what God's done for us, and we understand that, and we are thankful for that. Why do we love others? Do we love others just because God told us to love others? That's a good place to start, maybe. But when we look down at the core of why we love others, is because there's a certain sameness that we all share. And I don't care who you are. I don't care, male, female, old, young, so on. I don't care any of that. There's a certain sameness that we have being human. There is a necessity for love in our lives. There's a necessity for connection. We understand that emotionally. God stated at the very beginning when he looked at Adam, what did he say? It's not good that man should be alone. God understood that humankind need relationships. And the ultimate relationship is with him, but we need relationships in this life as well. So there are emotional needs. We need friends. We need support. It's one of the reasons why God designed the church and Christ built the church, is to give us kind of a support system, because we need people in our lives. And that's common. It doesn't matter who you are. Common is our spiritual needs. Our spiritual needs. And that is this. We're all sinners. I was talking last week. I got up and was preaching last Sunday morning. And I started off the sermon with just kind of just opening my heart. You know, people look at preachers, or they look at elders, they look at deacons, they say, you know what, those people have everything going. Those people got it together. They're perfect. And the reality is that's not true. You know, preachers have spiritual problems. Preachers have, problems dealing with temptation. Elders have all kinds of problems. All Christians. The outside saying they got it together spiritually. That's not always the case. Because we're all sinners. And I know people in the world have a hard time seeing, they see Christians as being this or that, or they're being good and holy. I think one of the great and the most important lessons that we need to teach people is we're not perfect. The only difference is washed away. And that blessing that we have can be theirs as well. You know, notice in Galatians chapter 3 and verse 28, there's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, for you're all one in Christ Jesus. You are one in Him. There's no difference in any one of us in God's eyes. God doesn't look and say, they're male, they're female. He doesn't look and see, they're old, they're young. He doesn't look and say, they're Greek, they're Jew. He looks and he just sees saved and lost. That's the only distinctions that he makes, saved and lost. Walking with him or walking away from him. So our love really is to be motivated out of this sense that we share a common dilemma. And in that, I know what I need. And if that's what I need, then that's what I need to show, because that's what you need as well. I mean, isn't that what Jesus said in essence in the Golden Rule? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Why is that? Because we share sameness. There's a common thread in our lives. Well, let's look at this last thing here, and that is genuine love is a ministry to the lost. In John chapter 13, verse 34, we already looked at that, where Jesus says, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another. But in verse 35, he goes on and he says, by this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have what? Love for one another. It's by our love that we demonstrate the genuine nature of Christianity. It's by our love, how we treat each other, that we demonstrate to people that the church of the New Testament is what we are. And so when we don't practice that kind of love, when we don't practice doing what's in the best interest of others and putting them before us, what's that demonstrate? What does it demonstrate when a church bickers and fights? What does it demonstrate to a church where there's no interaction between people? We have, in our auditorium, we have 4 sections. And you have 2 long sections. If you're split them in half right here and put 2 on the outside, it'd be kind of like what we are. And do people interact with each other? Do the sheep that are on this side interact with the goats on this side? Do they love each other? People come in and they identify those kinds of things. Well, Jesus says in John chapter 17, by unity, by the unity that you have in between brethren, that you demonstrate God's love for the world and Jesus is the Son of God. In other words, how we conduct ourselves as a church family, as a flock, as a congregation, speaks a message to the world that is around us. And if we don't have the unity, if we don't have the love, excuse me, what kind of message does that speak? What does that say to the world? People ask the question, why are there so many churches? Well, one of the reasons is people just don't get along. And they look at that and they say, I don't want a part of Christianity, if that's how people are. Genuine love magnifies Jesus Christ to the world. So that's the priority of love. It is these 3 points. It's a manifestation, it's action, it's motivated by sameness, and it is a ministry to seek those that are in the world. But what Paul does in verse 9 and verse 10 is he starts to describe how love presents itself. And we'll go through these pretty quick. What time do we usually get out? 15 after, okay. So I'll go till 30. I actually, I'm actually not going to do that, but I was listening to recording of the first time I preached a sermon back in 14, and I looked at the time, and it was 50 minutes. Like 50 minutes? Wow, we'll have to cut that down. We had a gentleman, I was out of town a few weeks ago, and a guest speaker, and he spoke an hour and a half in one sermon. I get a text from one of the deacons, and he says, no one's ever going to complain anymore about how long you preach. Like, okay. So let's talk about the presentation of evil. No, notice this. He goes on, he says, abhor what is evil. The presentation of love. Abhor what is evil. And that's that's counterculture, isn't it? When we talk about love in today's culture, everyone's fine. It is this postmodern concept that there's no such thing as truth. Everyone's fine in what they're doing. All we got to do is love. But what Paul does is Paul defines how love behaves itself. And he says it's abhorring what is evil. Psalm 97 verse 10, O you who love the Lord, hate evil. He preserves the lives of the saints. He delivers them from the hand of the wicked. He says, you who love the Lord, hate evil. And that word abhor in Romans is incredibly strong. It is to hate with an intense feeling. To look upon something with horror. Now the question is, how is that love? Love desires what's best for people. Love wants the best for them. Why love hates evil is because love identifies what evil does to people. Evil, sin, destroys people. That's why love abhors it. Think about it. Ever been around someone or been exposed to a story or a situation where you have people that are hurting? They're in an incredible amount of pain. Why? Because their spouse up and walked away. Or maybe it's someone who is dealing with the addiction of drugs or alcohol and what it does to their family. Or maybe it's prejudice and seeing what that does. All these kinds of things that we see in our world today that are being practiced and being praised and paraded, it should bring hurt to us, because what do we as Christians know? These things are destructive. They not only condemn people against God's love and will separate them from Him, but they are also destructive today. And it hurts to see people like that, because what they have going on in their lives. So love identifies that. And because I love, the damage that's done to relationships due to all kinds of sin, pornography, adultery, drunkenness. Listen, I don't want people to face that. It hurts me when table from a gentleman, and he's squandered his money. He's walked away from his and his two children, and he just leaves. Basically abandoned. That hurts to go through that, because that sin is not right. So what we need to understand is when we talk about sin and love and the relationship to those two things, love isn't being accepting of sin. Love is saying that's not the way God designed you or desires you to walk. He wants something better for you. So he goes on to say, holding fast to what is good. That word hold fast, the Greek word is interesting. In Genesis chapter 2, when God is talking about and initiating the marriage relationship, He says, therefore a husband shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, or hold fast to his wife. When they decided to take the Hebrew scripture and translate it into Greek, you know what word they used? They used this word that Paul uses here: hold fast, cling to, cleave. And we look at the term cleave, and what if you cook, you cut meat with what? A meat cleaver. And so it's an interesting word that in some senses it means to separate, doesn't it? You cleave, you separate. In this context, biblical context, it's different. It's bring together tightly. It's woven. It is to be knit together. And so what he says here is hold fast. Join yourself, fasten yourself together in love to those things that are good. Yeah, you remember, I'm dating myself, I know that, but the glue commercials, if you're my age or older, you remember the super glue or crazy glue commercial? The guy that had the hard hat, and he puts that little bit of glue on the brick that's on top of the hard hat, and he suspends himself from an I-beam. Get that picture in your mind. Hold fast to what is good. Now, what I think that guy was really doing, it was not demonstrating how that glue held fast to that beam as much as he was holding fast to that. That's what he was holding fast to. Hold fast to what, to define what's good. Good here is, good whatever we want it. Good here is those things that are inherently good. Those things that are of God. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8 gives a list of these things, and notice how general it is, because what Paul is doing, he's saying, okay, you can fill in the blanks here. Here's the general parameters. It's, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's anything excellent, if there's anything worthy of praise, think on these things. Some translations say, if there is anything good, think on those. Attach yourself to them. So don't dwell on sinful things. Turn away from evil. Abhor evil because of what it does. Cling to that which is good because that builds the relationship. And then in verse 10, he talks about brotherly affection. Now, in verse 10, this is what Paul says. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. And focus on that first sentence. Love one another with brotherly affection. You don't get it in the English, but it's in the Greek. In the Greek, there's 3 words for love here. Love one another. In the Greek, that's the Greek word philostorge. Philo is from phileo, which is the emotional kind of love. Storge is a family love. And it's a combination. So what he says is, you have an emotion for your brethren like they're your family. Why? Because they are your family. And it's a natural love. The love that we have as physical families is natural. Or it should be. When a child is born to a couple, parents, husband and wife, there's a natural, almost immediate affection right there for that baby. And that's what he says, that we are to have this kind of love, an emotional love, a family love, because it's natural. But then he goes on and he says, with brotherly affection. And that's the word Philadelphia, which is, again, that family emotional love. And the point is this: if you love God, you're going to naturally love the people that are around you that also serve God. You are to love them. Why? Because they belong to God. It doesn't matter where you go. There is a family relationship that we always have. We've been to Indiana several times. Summer, some of you know the reasons why in our family we lost my best mom and then her grandmother. And it's just great. We sit in the congregation, the church there, and people coming up, I couldn't ever say, yeah, that's your name, I know you. And they're giving hugs and all that. Why? Because it doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter where you go in Orange County. It doesn't matter where you go throughout the state. If you come to Clovis, where I'm at, there's a and that is, we are brethren. And so how does love present itself? Well, it abhors evil, holds fast to what is good. It has an affection for brethren. And if you were to rewrite this verse or parallel or paraphrase it as be lovingly loving towards one another in love. That's what he's saying. Just love each other. And then he concludes this thought with outdo one another in showing honor. The essential ingredient to love, to loving others, is to be humble. It's humility. Honor one another, to respect them, to esteem them, to hold them up, to outdo them. That word means to go beyond them. It's to lead the way. I think so often what happens in congregations is we sit back and we'll say, I'll honor you as soon as you prove you're worth honoring. That's not at all what he says. He says, you go out in front of them and you honor them. Why? Because they're your brethren and you love them. Don't wait until someone honors them. You be out in front honoring them. Now imagine this picture. A congregation where every individual takes the lead in esteeming and honoring the other people. How many people sit in pews and they're hurt because they're overlooked? How many people sit in pews and they're hurt because they're not thanked for what they do? Or they're not recognized? Or they're not given a position or a place? They're not shown appreciation? We need to be quick to give respect. Not because they're worthy or because of what they've done, but because we love them. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, to finish this up, when we were back east, the preacher of the congregation there was preaching on 1 Corinthians 12. And we know that passage where, it's metaphor for the church as the body. And he says, what if, everyone was a hand or everyone was an eye? And one of the points I took out of the lesson just to share with you is, we could sit back and think, well, I'm not that important. I'm not that significant. Let me tell you, every single individual is significant. Every individual is important. Every individual is worthy of love. Don't ever say to yourself, I'm not special, or I can't do this, or I can't do that, or just be content just to sit by and let other things happen. No, you are significant. God loves you, and we should love each other. In the next hour, we're going to be moving on, and we're going to talk about the second characteristic of practical Christianity is in our service to God. So appreciate your time and your attention. It's good to see everyone here. I see so many faces I recognize. Some that I don't. But that's okay, because things change. It's been almost 9 years. That's crazy to me, but it's good to be here. We'll visit more in between and after and throughout the next several days. But thanks for being here.